meeting of Gloucester School Committee to order. I'll remind everybody that the mission of Gloucester Public Schools is for all students to be successful, engaged, lifelong learners, and I'll ask you to join me in this lead. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First order of business is oral communications. Anybody who would like to address the school committee on any item not on the agenda this evening may address the school committee. They'll have 3 minutes, and we will not allow complaints as to individual performance or character. Anybody like to speak? Then we will move on to recognitions in a slow week. I would just like to recognize the entire school building committee for they're really putting in the hours of late, and they will be in the near future too. So they're all volunteers, and they all take their commitment to trying to get a new school for the city seriously. So we'll move on. We have a new student from the Gloucester High School Student Advisory Council. And so if you'd like to introduce yourself, you're on TV. So you can use this on your college resume.
Okay. I'm Isabel Canning. I'm the Vice President of All Student Council. So today actually we held the freshman student council elections, and it was a very a big turnout. We had 4 students running for president, and then the vice president, secretary and treasurer, they all ran unopposed, but we did have 12 students running for class representatives. So all of them are on the freshman student council. We also have our homecoming spirit week coming up October 21st through October 25th. Our Spirit Week themes, we have Monday, we have Slumber versus Lumber. Tuesday is Dress to Impress. Wednesday is Wild West Wednesday. Thursday is Throwback Thursday, and then Friday is our class color day. And that day we have our pep rally, that's October 25th, and that's also the night of the homecoming game at Gloucester High School. And then we also, this year, we started a new homeroom policy. So every 3 days we have a homeroom. And so freshmen go to their homerooms, sophomores go to their homerooms, so on. And they're all divided, and we use that. Today we did the freshman elections during homeroom, and seniors also had an assembly for stuff about the college application, just the process to apply to colleges. And we also have 2 foreign exchange students at the high school right now. One's from Germany and one is from Denmark.
Thank you. Any questions?
A quick question. What's your initial reaction to that extended homeroom every 3 days? Do you think it fits in?
I think it fits in. It before with assemblies, it would take time out of one certain class, and I know sometimes that strains students and teachers, and I think it works really well, honestly. And it gives us time to prepare for our next classes and go over college stuff for seniors, and I like it.
Yeah,
personally. Yeah.
Anything else? Well, thank you. You're, of course, as always, welcome to stay, but we understand that you probably have better things to do.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice night.
Okay, the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that anybody would like to remove for further discussion? If not, do we have a motion?
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. And we'll move on to our presentation. I told you it'd be quick.
Yeah.
So, as everybody knows, the school building committee last just seems meetings every night, that we voted to go from 9 options down to 2. And what we'll see tonight is a presentation basically explaining how that happened.
Yeah, I was gonna do just to the 2, not
Yeah.
go through each letter. So, oops, helps if you turn things on sometimes. So again, we're updating you for the preferred schematic report. I think the last time we met with this group was shortly after we submitted the PDP. And so we're in the phase 2 portion of the feasibility study. The goal of the preferred schematic report is to get from the 9 to the 1. And we've been doing this over the course of the last month, meeting very regularly to look at all the options and start to reduce them. Our goal is to submit on October 23rd to the MSBA for that preferred schematic option and to choose that between now and then. So as we began to really drive down and consider the options, we went back to our earlier considerations and evaluations and started looking through those in order to see how we evaluated each option. We start, of course, with the ability of an option to meet the educational program, and that's foremost. And so the weighted scores at the bottom, there's 16 criteria in that one option that helps us evaluate whether or not a proposed option meets the educational program. And we say that it's about whether or not the spaces that we can provide actually serve the programs that you have. So when you think about a building that you have now, classrooms are undersized, so you're not meeting your educational program, or if spaces are missing, special education, arts, music, those kinds of spaces aren't meeting your educational program. So the ability to provide those helps you in this category here. Then we talk about site location. There's 5 criteria in that one. It deals with swing space and building scale within the neighborhood, whether it's going to feel out of place because it's so large in order to make that building fit into that neighborhood, environmental impact, whether or not we need additional land just to make that option work, and then infrastructure and capacity of that infrastructure. So that would be whether or not you have the utilities to serve the building, the new building, and how close they are. That gets weighted at 10%. Sorry, the educational program is the highest weight at 35%. Site location is 10%. Site circulation, that's our ability to get cars off the road, separate parents from buses and kids who are pedestrians from oncoming traffic. So that's really important, and it also deals with the ability to get those cars in and out of a neighborhood or a site location. That gets a 15% weighted score. Site amenities, those have to deal with outdoor learning spaces, the garden program, which is a big program here in Gloucester, play space, whether it's fields or playgrounds or hardscape play spaces, and the opportunity for outdoor learning spaces in a different environment, and whether or not that outdoor learning space would be located in a space that would be active and usable. That gets 10%. And then building design. So we get a lot of control over building design. In a lot of cases, we don't get as much control when you're doing additions and renovations, or if you're renovating an existing building. But as we move into new buildings, we get more control over that. But solar orientation is one of those pieces. If a building, the way the building is orientated on site, flexible spaces within that building, daylighting, those kinds of things are built into the score, the number 5 category for building and design. And that gets weighted at 30%. All of those add up to 100%. And then we consider what the cost of the building is. So we want to choose the best option based on everything except cost. We want to make sure that it's meeting all your educational programs. And then we consider the cost. And that becomes something that we weigh comparatively. So you're going to choose your best option and then compare those options based on their cost, time to complete that particular option, and then time to complete the master plan. So that's really important. So I wanted to talk about that for a moment. When we talk about neighborhood schools or consolidated schools, we have 5 schools here in Gloucester. We started with the West Parish, so this is going back a little bit in history. When you first submitted your SOI, to the MSBA for West Parish. That was in 2009, and you weren't accepted right away. It took you 3 years to get accepted into that program, and then another couple of years before that school actually opened in 2016. And then, because you knew what the conditions were of the other schools, you immediately put in for the next school, which was East Gloucester. And because of the condition of East Gloucester, you were accepted right away. So that's important to know. And that's why we're looking at the East Gloucester now in 2019, and then a school opening in 2023. If you were then to follow the same pattern and submit in 2023 for another school, if you were accepted right away, or if it took you 3 years, you'd be looking at your third school opening in 2030 or 2033. If those patterns stay the same. That's if you got in within a 3-year period or immediately. So if you're looking at consolidated schools, you've got all your problems solved by 2033, potentially. If you are looking at doing all schools, each school individually, you're spreading that out to potentially 2050, 53. And that is with an understanding that this trajectory of no more than 3 years would actually apply. And that the MSBA is still looking to do these kind of programs. So that's something really important to consider when you're talking about consolidations and how to get your schools and how to serve as many children as possible right now, today, so that you can move on to the next project and serve as many children in that building project next. So that's one of the considerations that we need to talk about when cost. And the other part is it gets more expensive as you go down the line. Escalation keeps happening. So going back to the options, these were the 9 options that we looked at with the PDP. The top number, the 39, 39, 61, 64, 68, 74, sold. 87, 91, 98. All of those numbers, those are the scores based on that criteria that I just told you about. And those are based on 100. And what you can see here is that nothing got 100. There's no such thing as the perfect building and the perfect site, and it just doesn't happen. The numbers that scored the lowest in yellow all happen to be on the same site. They're all on the East Gloucester site. Yellow is the East Gloucester site, the blue is the Veterans Memorial site, and the green is the Green Street site. So when we started looking at these, we started immediately talking about the score and the cost of it. The numbers below are the costs, estimated cost for those buildings. And when you take away, oops, there's only supposed to be one of the Green Street ones was supposed to stay here. The last row, when you take away the top 6, you get the highest scoring of this. And when you start thinking about which option on the same site you're going to choose, you're going to choose the one that scored a little bit higher if you're going to only look at that particular site. So then we're down to 2. We're down to the Veterans Memorial site and the Green Street site. So we want to talk a little bit about these 2 sites. Why are they different in scoring and why are they different in costs? So the top number, the difference in the scoring is impact to students, which was swing space and site amenities. So veterans, because those students are on that site now and the site is quite tight and we'd be moving trucks and everything past that building, it would be beneficial to the students to move off that site. So there's a cost for swing space that I think is -3 points. And then there's site amenities, and that is really just about the size of the site. A bigger site gives you the opportunity to have more amenities. The site has the wooded area and the wetlands area, and so there was 1 extra point for the Green Street site for site amenities. When we talk about cost, the cost of the swing space is included in the 69 million, and the relocation of the ball field is included in that 69 million. There's also some costs of easements that we haven't considered. There's some other costs for bringing utilities into the Green Street site, which are still unknown. So that's the difference between that. Do you want to talk a little bit about cost?
Yeah, I think just one thing on cost, I mentioned this last time in City Council as well. When we talk about costs, right, I mean, we do estimates at this point in time, but these costs are intended to be relative, right, or comparative in nature, compared to each other. At this point in time, as we've discussed previously, we really haven't done any detailed design. We haven't even started the schematic design phase. So everything is at very much a conceptual level. So when we talk to estimators and we talk about how big is the school? Generally, we have an understanding of what the site cost would be, but that will be refined. But what it does do, as you saw in that chart previously, it does give you a sense of the comparative level of cost between a reno project, an ad reno project, or a new construction project. So we just want to make sure that everybody understands that today, because at some point in the future, okay, when the schematic design is done, the one thing that we can guarantee you is that number will be different, right? But it is a reasonable order of magnitude in terms of what the cost of the project is expected to be. Thanks.
So we're going to talk about the school just a little bit, the actual building. The building on each site would be exactly the same building fits on each site. We've designed a building here that meets all the educational program needs. So the cost difference is not within the building piece of it. This would be a 3-story building. Your entrance to the, my clicker doesn't work. Your entrance to the main part of the building would be located here. That's adjacent to the cafeteria, so the cafeteria could be open to the public after hours. The rest of the building for the educational spaces could be shut down from the public and secured. The gymnasium would be available after hours, as well as the library center, which is on the 2nd floor, and the art center. So you have spaces here that can be open to the public and used after school hours without having the entire building open because it's separated, the wings are separated. Other pieces of this design which are very interesting is extended learning spaces. These are open gathering spaces for students to do collaborative work. This is hand-on project building, and the spaces where students can come together as larger groups rather than within their classrooms. You might have a grade grouping all together to hear a safety and security meeting about safety. You might have a special reader come in to talk about the latest book that they wrote. You might have other projects that are going on. Your science program, which is a hands-on program, could be happening in these kinds of extended learning spaces with larger groups and outside of the classroom space. Also embedded within the classroom grade groupings are these small pink spaces. These are pull-in spaces, so your special education learning spaces are pulled into the classrooms. Students are no longer leaving their classrooms and walking the length of the hallway or up a floor or down floor. They're within their classrooms, they're pulled together, and you're sharing resources between 2 classes for each grade grouping that they're on. So these are some ways that we've begun to incorporate your education program into this new building design. And then, go ahead.
Before you, I just want to point out too, on every design that was considered for any of the options, the gym is on the 2nd floor.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent was to keep the footprint as small and tight as possible. So to have it on the 1st floor, nothing can really go above the gym, but the gym can go above other things. So that keeps the building as small as reasonable.
Right, and that's a consideration. Even though we had 2 different sites, one was a larger site, we still wanted to keep that footprint contained and smaller. And then just going back to that, the criteria of measurement. So I'm going to show you this one here. So in the education, this was the scoring for each of those criteria. This particular option scored quite high in education, as well as site location, circulation, amenities, and building design. The only difference between this one and this one is that extra 3 points in the education group for student impact. That is the moving of students for potentially 2 years to another site. And the site amenities, where this got 1 extra point for additional amenities. We don't know what those are exactly, but larger site promotes more amenities. And overall, I just wanted to show you, last 2 pictures are just the sites themselves. So this is Veterans Memorial School, with the school located approximately where the ball field is, providing enough parking to get cars off the site, larger site circulation queue so that you're getting parents off the main road and queuing up within the site, which is one of the issues that you have out there right now. Parents are dropping students off along the road, buses are parked on the road, and we actually went out there to witness one of the buses pulls in, backs up, drops the students off, and then comes out. And it would no longer happen in this case. You'd come in, circulate, drop students off within the site, on the curb, and then they would enter the building from there. Similar on this site, on the Green Street site, you would have students and buses. In this particular one, parents would be coming in off of here, doing a big loop around, dropping students off at the front door, and buses would have a separate loop come in and drop off in the back here. And that is the presentation. So do we have any questions?
Joel? My first question is on the Green Street option, where you're hitting 34 out of 35. This is a virgin site, a custom designed school. How come we're not hitting 35 out of 35 on education? What's missing from the Green Street option that would have put it to a perfect 35 out of 35 for education?
That's a
Why?
good question. I don't know yet. I can look it for you in a second to see where it scored lower.
Okay.
It might, you know what, it might have been the solar orientation in that particular one. It was orientated differently so that we could.
Preserve more forest.
Right, so in this, so we had two options. The second option, the G2 option, the building was the longer way and we were cutting back into the forest, but the solar orientation was correct. In this particular one, we went through the field, orientating the building differently to preserve the woods, but you lost that point for the daylighting.
That's all part of the educational score?
Yeah, daylighting is a large part of educational building design.
The second question, I may have missed some previous presentations. The first one I heard discussion about the easements. And I understand from the way that the entrance is laid out and the conceptual plan you have there for Gloucester Road / Green Street, that's certainly emptying out onto what's called Gloucester Crossing Road, which you understand is private property. However, there's currently the very narrow roadway, it's a path almost, like goes along Green Street and winds down to the full property, does cross solely city property and intersects with a schoolhouse road, which is public, into that T intersection.
Yeah.
And so, as there,
You're talking about the property that actually occurs over here.
yeah, it's like above and behind the W.
So, correct.
And the road goes down in current. That's how you used to get vehicles up from Fuller onto Green Street, was that little road.
Yeah, and it's a really tight piece.
And it's steep.
And it's steep, and it would be very difficult to get buses and cars there, so the thought of not coming through there would be.
Oh, no, I think the T intersection would be much better if possible, wherever it is, but I just want to make sure that, for some reason it hadn't been overlooked, that
No.
if for some reason the price comes in high, at some point you go, well, this will cost, this easement, this will cost to regrade this other lot the city owns to get a reasonable approach to the
Yeah,
public road.
that particular area that you're speaking about starts out wide and then comes in narrow.
Yeah,
And so it would be difficult
No,
to funnel both cars and buses, three-way traffic, because you want to have buses going in one direction and cars going, so.
and then, if I may, my last question is, I sort of wrote as much to the committee earlier, I'm a little confused as to why there's still discussion when you set forth the criteria and one site, this isn't 91 scores, it's a 91 and 87, and site selection is built into those criteria, it's only worth 10% that's still built in. So I'm a little confused as to why there's much more discussion to be had. If you built the rubric, you scored all the sites, and one came out on top. If the goal, as you stated, is to pick the highest, the best one per the criteria, I don't know why F2 is still being looked at.
Well, I don't know if I stated that, but there is different criteria that comes out. So in order to avoid designing around criteria, you build your criteria first, and then you score after that, right? So it's kind of a blind thing.
Mhm.
One of the things that we didn't discuss early on when we were building the criteria was walkability and location. And I think those two are important factors that we should be thinking about as we move forward as well. So in those cases, these two options, as we begin to compare those pieces together, that kind of information will begin to decipher between one option or the other.
So walkability was not part of site location?
It was not originally part of that discussion, so it's something that we should be thinking about, location of the site to the community in general.
At the building committee meeting tomorrow, we'll be talking about the criteria we're gonna be using to go from the 2 to the 1,
Hmm.
because there will be new criteria. that people want to look at that aren't.
Right. And as we move forward, it's more about, here's the criteria, which one meets it better? Because both should be meeting, but which one does it better?
And I think just generally speaking too, it's a process, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how this was originally set up, which is relatively typical, when we look at other projects, other school districts do it, is, we sit down and, we meet with various groups and say, what's important, right? What's important to you in terms of if we're trying to go and select a school, what are these guiding principles that you want to look at? And so there's a discussion. And that was really the basis of forming this kind of scoring system, right, that was developed, and the weightings associated with that and the various sub-criteria associated with that. And so that was all put together, and all of that, none of that has anything really to do in terms of that scoring cost, and that was done fairly early on in the process. We're still waiting to go and get, more detailed cost results here back fairly shortly, but that's what that represents. At the same time, that was done a while ago, and now as the process has moved forward, we've had more and more opportunity to have a dialogue with the public, through, as right, a number of information sessions. And so, that helps to go and shape how people feel about this. I don't think anything really changes in terms of that portion of the scoring that was developed, but now, you're starting to bring in, other perspectives on that, and, that may or may not shape how, people make decisions going forward.
Can I just just push back a little on that? My concern about, and I understand this is the process, my concern about saying, okay, we established our criteria, we scored out these 14 different options, based on that criteria, we narrowed it to 9, based on that criteria, we narrowed it to 2, and now at 2, we're gonna start bringing in new criteria like walkability, because what's incredibly walkable is Chapel Street, right? Davis Street Extension, it's incredibly walkable, right? But that wasn't part of the original criteria, and the entire East Gloucester site was eliminated. There are other huge issues with East Gloucester, I'm not discounting those, but again, that wasn't part of the scoring that was going on that informed the committee as they were chopping things down from 14 to 9 to 2.
Yeah, no,
to now bring it in seems like you're moving goalposts, you're rearranging goalposts after.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit, right? See, I don't think that anybody's talking about trying to change that scoring system, but, there's nothing in, this process, I think, that's ever static, right? I mean, otherwise, everybody would have made a decision, weeks and weeks and weeks ago. So I don't think that anybody's talking about changing the scoring criteria and setting up a new scoring criteria. I think people are just taking what's already been established and taking advantage of, what they've heard moving down the forward. For example, if all of a sudden, some other information comes back that says, that's just entirely impractical to go and assume that you could do that. I don't think anybody would go and say, well, we should still choose that because we had that scoring system.
No, but that's information you couldn't have known ahead of time. Walkability, you could have known at the very beginning.
But I think a lot of those things are kind of included in a lot of those scoring criteria over there. I don't want to put words in Michelle's mouth. But, part of this is kind of, it's a process. And, you don't have all of that information day one. You start to gain information over time. And that information that we have right now has been established, and those are the scores associated with that, but I think it's reasonable, and we see it in most places that we go. If all of a sudden new information becomes available or it gets augmented, then that influences people's decision. Maybe not. Maybe everybody just stays exactly the way they were. But I'm just trying to give you, our perception of how that works both here and in other places as well.
And I'm not suggesting that we're changing criteria, I'm just saying that this is one consideration that we do have. So this is your student mapping for all the homes within this district and where they go to school. And then we break it down to look at just the Veterans Memorial and East Gloucester kids, those are in blue and red over there. Now if you begin to zero in that cluster, if you look at just the East Gloucester students right here, you can see that this is the center of that cluster. This is the East Gloucester population of where those kids go to school. It's not limited to over here, which was fascinating for me to see. And something that we knew early on, but when you start mapping out where the houses are, you begin to see, here's one site, here's another site. If you draw a line between those and cut that in half, right, you've got 60% of those households on that side of the line.
Closer to veterans.
Right.
Closer, and 40% on this side. And then if you do the same thing over here with the Green Street site, you know, it's more 50-50. So these are some other considerations that we're beginning to look at as we're beginning to pull this together. And whether or not you change your and redistrict, that's completely a whole nother topic.
I guess what we keep coming back to is, that isn't information that wasn't available we've been looking at that map for the whole 4 years we've been on this committee, right? That information existed. And so if that's important for site selection, I don't know, it's interesting that it wasn't part of if it's not important, it's not important, it shouldn't change things now. But if it is important, if you're only getting it now, that's not your fault.
No.
Right,
This is information that we've been using since after we submitted the PDP, but we just went and counted the households. I mean, it's important to count the numbers and to actually do this. So it's information that we're using to figure out where to go next.
Okay.
So,
If I'm not mistaken, we were showing these maps when we went around to all the schools.
Yeah.
We've been using this.
We
I
update
don't know
them
why
every-
you're saying they haven't been using it.
no,
We update them every year.
They've been
I just
using
went
it for
counting.
years.
Right.
you know, it was drawing the maps and counting, which was a whole different mathematical
I also
problem.
want to point out that the MSBA process, I mean, they've asked in different submissions, how many community meetings have you had? Like, are you listening to your community to build support and consensus around what your ultimate solution is? So it's expected that there's no decisions until we go through each step of the process. We're still waiting for traffic information and other things that everything's going to be a trade-off. No site's going to be absolutely perfect. We're building in a city that is already populated. So you're going to say, what's more, you know, what do we think is better? Not necessarily ideal in different ways. So I just think the process for me has been so helpful, because what you think is one thing, you know, 6 weeks later it's like, oh no, you know. So this process is really important to get everybody informed and to gather all that really important information.
And I just want, like, if you're looking at that timeline to completion for your master plan and you're committed to the consolidated schools, automatically there is where you have to say East Gloucester can't not support a 440 student school, that site. So I think, you know, no matter how you look at it, you've chosen the right ones to go forward and further explore in this step right here, because you can't explore 440 at East Gloucester. It would just be detrimental to that neighborhood. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I have a question, and I apologize, I was always coming late to doing other things. So like you said, we're not rushing, and there's not a timeline, so MSBA did say, well, I know about the cost differentiality, but the fact is, did MSBA say there is a timeline, that you have to have this done by a certain time?
October 23rd.
Wait a minute,
Well-
is that what they said, or is that what we're thinking because we wanna actually be able to stop moving and going through the process?
There are points that we try to make their meetings. In other words, to put in our paperwork on October 23rd will get us before the board in January.
In December.
In
So
December.
you get to be before
And we'll
the
get
board
a
by the
decision
end of
in
the year.
January.
Right, because this is not even guaranteed from them yet that we're gonna get the money,
No,
so people need to know that. Okay, it's not guaranteed, this is
It's
just,
not a deadline.
like I said, I find it, we're very lucky to be there within this
But-
early. We have to go through the process.
but they do express concern when they think you're bogged down, because they budget their money and they
Exactly.
want to spend it, they want to get it committed to projects, and so.
And if, let's say we did made it, when's the next time they do that? We lose a whole year.
Yeah.
No.
Lose some time though.
You lose 3 to 6 months. If you were to miss the October 23rd date, that puts you approximately 3 months behind, because they only meet every other month.
Okay.
About 3 months, you're not getting into the board meeting until February or sometime. What it does is it snowballs the opening date of your school. So right now you're targeting a September opening of 2023. And if you were to push that by 3 months, you might as well go 6 months because you're not gonna open school in November. Now you're opening after Christmas, maybe, or maybe you're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna push it out a whole year. And so missing those
That's
dates
right.
does have a snowball effect. That doesn't say that you rush it, it just says you have to understand the process and the way that it's going to affect the end date.
A question, with those delays, either you or Brad, what's the escalating costs of construction estimated on a monthly basis or what?
I don't know, what, 4% a year? is-
Yeah, so it's roughly $2 million, I think, a year. Somewhere around there. I have to go back and check, but
Divide that.
no, sorry. I think it's like $1 million for $2 million a year. I think I'll check, but I think that's the number.
Yeah,
Divide
I
that
think
by
right now
4.
our estimate shows 4% per year, so whatever that is.
4%.
Construction.
Well, 4% of $70 million
Right,
is
2.8.
2.8 million.
Million.
Yeah.
That's a lot of dough.
So there is that urgency. So there's no penalty. We want to maintain a good relationship with the MSBA. We want them to know that we're doing our due diligence and getting our work done, but
$2 million, you're fired.
okay. Any other questions? You can send this, I got a request from the city council. It's the same presentation. They need it for their
Yeah,
records.
I meant to send it today,
Yeah,
I will do that
Great, thank you.
tomorrow morning.
Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Great.
Thank you.
I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Every day. All right.
So we did clarify that you're gonna meet tomorrow and whatever, and it's not gonna come back to, did anyone explain to people, because they keep asking, so you guys meet tomorrow, what's the process and when does it come back? Does the school committee, does it go back to the city council? I mean, can you please, for the record, say that process one more time? You listen to the process, please.
The timeline right now to get to the 23rd is that this building committee is gonna meet tomorrow. They're gonna talk about the two sites. We're gonna talk about some other issues around the sites that need to be resolved, or at least the committee needs to be made aware of. And we will come back a week from tomorrow. The building committee will meet again, at which point, if they're ready, they will vote to one site. So it's a week from tomorrow, if everything goes well.
Does this committee have to get involved or not?
That would be so a week from tomorrow is I gotta look at the calendars, is it the second?
Third.
The 3rd. So if they would meet the 3rd, our next meeting is the 9th, we would vote on the 9th. Okay? And it would just be an up and down vote. We would vote to approve what the recommendation is or not.
And that's.
Then it gets submitted to the MSBA, and then we wait a little bit. Then in January, by January, we'll know whether they've accepted.
December, your meeting, I believe, would be December 11th.
Yeah, we'll meet with them, but will they decide that day?
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
So because you have a meeting previously with them?
yeah,
In November, and then.
all right.
based
Okay,
on
I was
that
thinking
meeting-
that December was the first meeting.
No, you have a meeting in November, and then based on that meeting, the recommendation will go up to them for their meeting in December.
And then, once they have approved the preferred schematic design, then we have a fixed amount of time to secure the financing. There is a timeline on that, 120 days.
Right, so just make sure that those dates, so that the one that's being submitted right now is the 3rd schematic report, right? And then that ultimately will be, hopefully approved.
Right,
And then they will authorize us to go into schematic design,
right.
right? And then schematic design will be done sometime in late March or late April, I believe.
Yeah.
And then at that point in time, right, that'll be approved by the board, hopefully, the MSBA board. And once it's approved by the MSBA board, then the city has the 120
That's what kicks in
days.
the 120 days.
Correct.
So there's another step in here that I slipped up on.
Yeah, it's not until
So,
May or so.
yeah, so that would mean that we would have to have a debt exclusion override vote sometime in the end of May or the beginning of June,
Correct.
if that were the case.
Correct.
One more procedural question. The submission that happens hopefully on the 23rd that goes to their December meeting for their approval, if they don't approve, is that end of the road, get back at the very beginning, or is that just a, hey, we didn't like this design or this whatever, go back and try harder and come back to us, or are we just like out?
So the way that it works in reality is that we're submitting here on October 22nd in the anticipation of a board vote in December. So MSBA staff reviews it during that time. And it's unlikely, right, that it will get put on the board's agenda if there's a problem with it. So if there's anything that needs to be modified, right, and it can be modified before that board meeting, that scheduled board meeting,
Staff comments come back to the building.
then we would attempt to resolve it. If it can't be resolved at that point in time, then we wouldn't be put on the agenda most likely.
Okay, thank you.
Basically, if you get on the agenda, then,
It's a good sign.
yeah, it's a good sign.
It's a good sign.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, then we shall move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And speaking of good signs, the state legislature is on the cusp. Thank you, by the way.
Thank you, Michelle,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Fred. Somebody should rent you guys a room.
I know.
Believe me, we keep showing the
We are,
Yeah.
trust me.
The state legislature is on the verge of approving a bill which is going to change the way in which school funding takes place, and it's going to increase school funding by the cost of around $1.5 billion over the next 7 years. The Joint Committee on Education reported favorably, is the term they use, on what's called an act relative to educational opportunity for students. And we've talked about the Foundation Budget Review Commission over the course of the last couple of 3 years, actually since 2015. This particular act is actually going to adopt many of the principles that the FBRC has been lobbying for quite some time. So some of this includes that the foundation budget is going to try to adjust for healthcare costs and increase the funding associated. They'll be using up-to-date health insurance trend data collected by the GIC, of which we are a part. Special education enrollment and cost assumptions are going to be modified as well to more accurately reflect district enrollment. When you look at the schedule right now, and in fact we went to see Roger Hatch about what we consider to be a very low percentage of the overall number of students and what the costs associated with those students are. His argument at the time, if I recall, was that because some students are not full-time special education, getting services 100% of the time, that they came up with some sort of a calculation for that, if I remember. But they're going to be increasing, if you've got X number of special education kids, the amount allocated per student is going up.
My question on that, which hopefully I think Representative Ferrante will come to a future meeting to talk about how this impacts, is that special education change going to account for a specific district's enrollment, or are they just upping the average amount in the formula, which is universal for all communities, whether you're above or below that percent? So,
what the information that I got and have quoted here is that special education enrollment and cost assumptions are modified to more accurately reflect district enrollments. So I'm hoping that it's the first and not the second. The bill increases funding for English language learners in a similar way. It'll be graduated in that older students require more resources. So that might be a little bit more more funding for our older students as opposed to our younger students. And the third is that low-income students as well. There will be additional funding based on the share of low-income students as well. So again, the Foundation Budget Review Commission has pushed in all three areas: health insurance, special education, and low income. They are going to be defining low income as going to be returning to 185% of the poverty level as opposed to the current 133%, which will then incorporate more funding for more students. And they're also going to be increasing funding for social emotional learning, meaning for psychological services and for guidance as well. That also will be upped, if you will, increased in terms of the foundation budget.
So my understanding is that one of the difficulties that Gloucester in particular has is that part of like the very first calculation Chapter 70 funding deals with is property values of the district. And I remember there was 2 or 3 of these various bills floating around recently. I don't recall any of them, like that seems to not be changing. So
There's basically 2 different factors in how much money the communities get in Chapter 70. And the first one is the foundation budget. And the foundation budget is universal for all communities. In other words, they say well, 90% universal, and they do give a higher, a little bit more money to people that live in urban areas than, there's slight differences. But they say, a special education student should get this much. What they have been saying in the past is that if you should have some very ridiculously low number, like I want to say 3%, 3.5% of your students should be special needs students, whereas we're 27%. But that's the same for everybody.
sure.
What's different for everybody is your Chapter 70 allocation, which is determined by 2 factors. One is property value and then income.
Right.
But it's heavily weighed on property value. So Gloucester gets the minimum amount of percentage. So in other words, when some communities, let's get 100% of the foundation budget for their schools. Some communities get 50 or 60 or 30. Gloucester gets 17 and a half. It's 18.
Very low.
It varies. It's the same as Manchester. We get the same percentage of our the foundation budget as the very wealthy communities because of the high property values.
So these changes are changing the add-ons, but we're still starting at 18, right?
They're not changing the foundation,
Right.
the formula for distribution of Chapter 70 funds.
Right.
So if they really fix the foundation budget to make it reflect what it really costs to educate students, we'd still only get 17% of that.
Right.
They can up that, and maybe we get some more money. But the reason they have foundation budget in the beginning was because some communities there was no control. Some communities weren't spending enough money on education. So I mean, even I was actually on the school committee where they would come and ask you, are you meeting foundation? Because communities were not spending that much money. So the state came in and said, you've got to spend this much money. And they also said, if you can't, we're going to give it to you.
I just want to make sure I understood the concept. These are good changes, but the biggest thing that really affects the money we're getting is unfortunately staying. This is helpful, but it's not the big thing we're looking for. Which
It doesn't fix the inequity
right. Okay.
in the formula for
However,
Gloucester.
the news releases coming out do state that both the DOR and the DESE will be analyzing the method of determining required local contribution to Chapter 70 formula for the purpose of improving equity and predictability and accuracy. So they may, in fact, be looking at the core aspects of the foundation formula. A big one, which is going to help us quite a bit, is that they're going to be expanding the special education circuit breaker to also include transportation. And our out-of-district transportation We budgeted $409,000 this year, so that's a lot of money going out for transportation. And what do you estimate, about 25% of that would be eligible for circuit breaker?
They're going to phase it in over 4 years. First year would be 25% we would receive. So 25% of 400,000. And then 50, third year 75, and then fourth year full. So adding the transportation costs for
That's huge.
each student would help us greatly.
So this is all very good news, and the extent to which they do begin to dramatically examine the core of the foundation budget is stay tuned.
So, just so I'm clear, that we're going to be able to add the expense of transportation to the expense of a student.
Right.
So we're not never gonna get 100%.
But
You know, they're going to increase that thing, but just so people understand, circuit breaker kicks in when you've spent 4 times?
4 times.
4 times the average that you're spending on a regular student. Okay, so, and then they're supposed to pay 75% beyond that. Okay, so we gotta be sending somewhere around $43,000 on a student before we start to get any of that money. But if they add transportation, that's gonna help.
right,
Because we have a lot of kids that are right on the cusp of that amount going to the North Shore Consortium. And if we can add transportation into that will get them over that line.
so if theoretically it's a $42,000 bill and transportation is another $8,000, so then you stand to collect 75% of that $8,000. If you multiply it by the number of students who are providing transportation for it, could be a nice significant chunk of change.
So then it'd be phased 25% of that,
Right, then next year.
75% of the 8,000 for each student that goes over the 4 times.
So 75% of 2,000.
75% of the 8,000.
Of the 8 or 25% of the 8 and then 75% of that?
Well, it's gonna help.
75 of the 8,
Of the 8, the whole 8.
and then 25% of that. So you could get down to the first year 2,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other good news is, which we received a couple of days ago, is that circuit breaker is in fact being funded at 75%. They were talking earlier when budget season was happening, 68 to 71.
Yeah, we budgeted 68% to be conservative. So the difference between the 68% that we budgeted and the 75% that it came in at is about 163,000.
Is that the first time ever?
That they budgeted.
At
75.
75.
So we're talking
first
about
time
this
in a long
year.
time.
This year,
For this
yeah.
year. For this
I'm
year.
talking about this year. First time ever they budgeted the full amount.
They may have done it once before since I've been here, but only once at best.
So that was good news.
Okay, good news. Excellent. Other types of good news, because we're only about good news tonight, is that we recently last week had a teacher evaluation workshop for new hires. This is, I guess, my way of just informing the school committee that we take a very high regard towards the orientation process. It's not something that happens with a meeting that takes place a week before school starts, but that we work with our new hires throughout the course of the year, through the mentoring program, through collective meetings that are about a half a dozen for the year. And because the evaluation system anywhere is something which is, something that everyone is a little bit self-conscious about, it's really important to make sure that the new hires have an understanding. And that understanding should be grounded in the fact that what we're trying to emphasize is the establishment of conversation between the evaluator and the evaluatee. It's the discussion, it's talking about instructional strategies and what is seen, it's making those adjustments. That's the key, not whether you get a gold star on your head or anything along those lines, but how do we open up those lines of communication to de-escalate the tension associated with evaluation, but more importantly, to get that kind of conversation going about teaching and learning. So the process, they had an overview regarding the evaluation process, a recap of the annual training provided by principals, because we also do it by building at the beginning of the year. They discussed the rubrics, which are the basis for how each teacher is evaluated in a host of areas. They then spent time actually literally writing a self-assessment about where they felt that they are, and they also spent some time beginning to write their goals as well, with the help of the assistant superintendent who helped to, in fact, ran the entire program. And then last, of course, is the whole mechanical piece of making sure you log on to our software program, which is called TeachPoint. So it was a successful day and appreciated. And yes, the development of SMART goals was taken up in the day's discussion, in case you're curious. Last are the changes to the ELA MCAS test design. Apparently there's been some concern about the length of the testing time with this, the new MCAS next generation. So they're going to be eliminating one of the essays in each grade to compensate in part, but not to extend the length of the test. They will be adding multiple choice items. Something about adjusting reporting category percentages, I'm not quite sure what that's all about. And a small reduction, well, what they're trying to do is to make sure that the grades 3 through 8 tests and the grade 10 tests are more similar in the ways in which they are assessing and testing students. Last, the 2019 MCAS results and accountability items were released yesterday, so hopefully we'll be in a position to present our MCAS results for 2019 at our next meeting.
Any questions?
I move that we accept the superintendent's report.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. And we will move on to our committee reports. And it looks, it's a good thing Mr. Gross did postpone his surgery.
It's all about him.
It's all about you. BNF.
All right, so we, at the last school committee meeting, we talked about the food service and how they were, I forget what it was, 37,000 or something.
Yeah.
Lower than last year. What we, with Martha Joe, the food service director, came in and told us that it wasn't due to participation because participation in 17 was 48%, in 16 was 47%, and in 18 was 47%. So our participation has remained stagnant. We need to get a little higher. Part of it was we had to reimburse out of some of the accounts money that was carried over for people who had left it in the account. A couple $1,000s went there. We also, what helped inflate last year was debt collection from prior years. And we also had some more forgiven debt that we, for free and reduced. We talked about, making the meals more appealing. What was discussed was that at the high school, they have 6 ovens, 3 don't work. The other 3 work marginally, not to their optimum performance. So one thing they can't do is they can't do oven fries. And it limits them on certain meal selections but oven fries was the thing that was used as an example, but there's I'm sure there's a whole host of other things that they can't do because the ovens they don't have the capacity, nor are the ovens there that work. We asked the food service to go back to their people and put a list together of all the equipment that is either obsolete, not working, or marginally working. So that should be coming to us at the next BNF meeting. She told us we use the same products as all the other districts, so it's not like the districts are being able to get different, more appealing supplies. We have a 38% of our students are eligible for free and reduced. And so that was the food service. There'll be a follow-up on that in the next meeting about, hopefully we'll have the equipment of what we need. I think we're gonna be a little disappointed disappointed with the amount, for aid, because these kitchens are all need help. Then we discussed vaping.
Oh, can I just add one
Sure.
thing? She did invite the
Oh,
school.
she invited, yes.
Invite the school committee to come and observe.
And have lunch.
Have lunch
Yeah.
and observe the making of lunch.
Yes, she
How do we
did. She
schedule
said,
that? How do we schedule that, the Rich?
I think you just asked Martha Joe. Is that-
Rich, should they go directly to Martha Joe to schedule a visit?
Sure,
Yeah.
we talked about it.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it can help too, it just let me know.
she said that she encouraged it and said that the staff would really appreciate it if we came in. So, yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I didn't write that down.
For the record, we don't serve cheese sandwiches, do we?
We do not,
No.
we do
A lot of
not.
schools do,
Right,
I'm proud of our
yep.
school.
No, we,
No child gets left with no food.
no, we're taking care of the kids, not punishing the kids. So we discussed vaping and vape detectors. I guess that we'll find out what happens. You know, the state now has banned them for the next 4 months or something. So we'll see how that continues. There's 15 total restrooms at the high school. We didn't have the O'Malley principal in, we just had the high school. So there's and he's also coming back to the next meeting because we asked him to talk to Georgetown and Marblehead, who have installed them, and to find out cost of installation. Are they hardwired? Are they Wi-Fi? Do they work? Do they
Are they gonna
someplace?
bring a machine so we can try it and smoke it?
Some place have dummies that they can move around, so that you don't have to buy the $1,000 detector for each bathroom, but you can reload, plug and move around so the kids go, oh, that bathroom doesn't have any. So, I think we could probably go to one of those schools and find out, so it's very similar to an ionized, smoke detector. It detects the,
If I may. I spoke with our Director of Health today to ask, there's some grants that have come in through the Department of Public Health, and whether or not this is something that those grants would support. She's not overly confident that that is the types of things that the Department of Public Health looks to support, that they are more invested in prevention. She also mentioned the 4-month probation, that the units themselves, that there's a delay between the sound detection and response, because the detector may be in a bathroom, something along those lines, but where the response goes off is going to be perhaps in an administrator's office. So, how does that work is something we have to find out from the other schools and stuff. She's aware that there are other districts that may have it, and she's going to do some research for us as well. As a health director, she is also concerned now with the moratorium, how are kids who may be addicted to nicotine, how are they going to be reacting in school, what's going to happen. She asked the question that if they're not going to go in the bathrooms, then where are we going to really stop them from vaping? And if not,
hopefully,
where will, I'm hopeful. However, if we're not successful, then where will the vaping take place if it's not taking place in the bathroom? So it's just another difficult challenge.
you have to white knuckle it like we did.
Walk past the teacher's room.
But they work they're like an ionized smoke detector, so it detects the vapor, but also, I guess they also have the capacity to detect noise. So I don't know how that, vibrations or something, but that's something that I read in my research. But I also think they can alert the cell phone, if you have a cell phone in the building. So I think you could have it pretty close at hand. It doesn't necessarily have to go to a central location.
Right.
I think it can go to cell phones. So anyway, that was the vaping discussion.
Respond.
Yeah. Everything else was pretty ordinary. I didn't take a whole lot of notes on it. But the people did say they do deter vaping. I don't know about everybody.
15 bathrooms or 15 stalls?
15 bathrooms.
Just building.
15 bathrooms, 2 in the main building, 3 in the science wing, 2 outside the field house, 2 in the field house balcony, and 2 in the vocational wing.
Locker rooms may be necessary as well.
I was gonna say, they don't want it to go there.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're not cheap. They're $1,000, and if you have to hardwire them, that's gonna be a whole nother, so. That's why I wanted to find out what's,
100%.
that's true. That's true. So I don't know if that, hey, I would hope we'd be allowed to. So the budget looks good, it's early in the year. So that was about it for that. There's something else coming up, under action about closing some old revolving accounts. We'll take them up now or take them up later.
There was another thing, wasn't there, the minimum wage thing?
The hourly wage for the security.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Where is that? That's true,
We
right?
can take those up now while they're fresh in your mind.
Okay. All right.
So there were,
Yep.
so under action, there's, we have revolving accounts for many things, most of which are used daily. You know, there's a revolving account for athletics, there's a revolving account for after-school programs, there's revolving accounts for transportation, ROTC, goes on and on, that are used constantly. There are some here that have languished, unused for
3 years.
more than 3 years, and they're listed under D, under action.
And this is not the first time these were brought up.
But the consensus of the BNF is that these are, and the CFO is that these are not only they're not being used, they are probably never gonna be used. So we can dissolve them and put the money into, where would the money go?
The general
It
fund.
would go right into the general fund, so, or it might buy perhaps a new stove
Might
or
fix some
oven.
ovens.
Might fix some
Yeah.
ovens, so.
That'd be nice.
It'd be nice to have it, so what the total's about $24,000,
Yeah.
a little bit less.
Well, I mean, we can add them up or we can do them
Yeah.
individually. There's only 4.
Just
Yeah, there's only 4
do it as listed.
I think we
and
probably
then
need
just
to
say
do
which
them.
one of them.
individually. Okay. So do we have a motion for a daycare?
I so moved that we move that we dissolve the account, the revolving account for daycare, authorize the CFO to close the revolving account for daycare of $179.14.
Second.
Any discussion? This is left over from when, I believe when the high school had daycare.
I guess I can.
You know, which it hasn't had for a number of years, so.
It's official.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
I move to authorize the CFO to close the revolving account of the insurance reimbursement in the amount of $22,500.
Second.
What this, it's just an account that was,
It's been.
Predates.
Yeah, predates me.
yeah,
It's been there for 3 or more years with no activity. And it's an account that is for insurance over 20,000. So it was received for at least 20,000 or more. So looks like it was received for 22,500, one fell swoop.
and never used.
And there it just sat.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? It's unanimous.
All right, I move that we authorize the CFO to close the revolving account of the environmental partnership in the amount of $1,077. And I so move.
Second.
And once again, this is just something that we got some money somewhere way back and it hasn't been used, so.
So, why would a revolving account be set up if it was just a one-time receiving money, you know? It's the,
These predate, I mean, these are old.
But we don't know that it was a one-time.
Well,
This could be a balance
yeah.
after some years,
Yeah.
but whatever
Okay.
its use was could be gone.
Generally speaking, revolving accounts are set up for accounts that take in money.
Right.
You know, like transportation or athletics or, you know, so that there's a.
Hopefully self-sustaining if possible.
Yeah,
Okay, just curious.
so these apparently took in money at some point, but, and didn't spend it all. So,
But they've been kicking around for a long time.
yeah. I mean, I remember this, the next one being there, you know.
Nobody
15,
has
15,
any clue.
Nobody knows what the next one is.
Okay, so I move to authorize
Wait,
this.
wait, we're waiting for the,
Go to the previous.
Oh, yeah, we got to vote on that. Any further discussion on environmental partnership? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous.
And I move we authorize the CFO to close the revolving account from Hampton Hill in the amount of $146.64. I so move.
Second.
I know where Hampton Hill is.
me too.
Yep.
I don't know
I used
why
to live up
we
there.
got- I don't know why we got $146.
Is that across from high school?
So.
Isn't that
you know,
Hampton Hill?
that's
What?
What?
Is it spelled Hampton?
Yeah,
down by
Hampton.
the,
Hampton.
It is Hampton with a
the
PT?
field.
Yeah.
It goes
Yeah, you
straight
know where it
across
is?
that
Yeah, no,
hill.
we're in high school, where's
Yeah.
the state one?
It used to be the Hampton Hill Tigers
Okay.
and stuff. There used to be a youth organization.
Yeah,
I
there
think
was
it
a-
came from that,
Yeah,
but that was years ago.
but like I say, we don't know. So, any further discussion on Hampton Hill? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous, okay. And then the other issue is the security guards.
Right, the part-time security guards at the high school, to move them to minimum wage. And then also, to keep pace with minimum wage going forward. And I so move.
Second.
These are, there are two people, and they work weekends, basically,
At the high school.
at the high school, just presence. Any discussion?
What's that?
Must be boring.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. And that concludes B and F, and now we'll move on to the ad hoc memorial
No.
subcommittee.
Yes, we will. And I have, somewhere. So we had two people who came before us in the ad hoc. One was Bill Goodwin for the weight room, and to possibly have it named after, Greg Swinson, because he donated an awful lot of time to the kids in the weight room, and not necessarily just athletes, anybody who came in, he was there every afternoon. He spent countless hours over, probably over a decade there, helping out Gloucester youth in the weight room. So that, because they can't use the weight room without an adult in there, so he made it be possible for it to be available. Our policy says that we don't name any spaces. So but there's another twist to this, is the GFAA wants to re-equip the room. So they want to do some fundraising. They're still gonna need to come before us also, so that's in the infancy. This is basically a probative question about what we could do about Greg Swinson. We told them that, if they raise the money for the equipment, the ad hoc committee was fine with them putting a plaque up saying that the money, that this equipment was donated in the name of Greg Swinson, or however they want to put it up in the room.
And they want to actually do renovations, they want to put windows
So they're not
in.
gonna name it the weight room, then they put a plaque.
Exactly. Yeah, so we're being able to honor Greg while maintaining our policy. Because it's helpful to be able to maintain that. I mean, it hasn't been for a long time, so we finally have started to draw the line. And so that's how that one went. Like I said, it's all preliminary. It's gonna be before us again for the weight room. They're still, And the next one was brought to us by Bob Rowland, the former athletic director at Gloucester High School, to discuss about naming the varsity baseball field at O'Malley for Jerry O'Neill, who was a athletic director, I don't know what, in the 80s? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe into the early 90s.
And what we, and so what we came up with was this is a draft of what got passed around, we're not assuming any cost. But we said that they could put a plaque down at the field saying that and then have an award however often we did discuss annual, but then we took that out. However often they want to nominate someone to be put on the plaque, so it'll be an award for a person who, the Jerry O'Neill Athletic Excellence Award, and it'd be displayed at that baseball field, basically is what this is.
So it would be the school committee that would be
The selectors.
and take nominations. We would authorize an award, and that we put the name on the plaque, and it'd be limited to people that have worked in the school department in the, and achieved out, we were still working on it, but had gone over and above and beyond their job description to further the athletic education of students.
Can I ask a question for you to the mayor? When you give out, so there's certain awards like the philanthropy award, things like that. Who reviews those nominations?
We set up an ad hoc, a little committee.
So it's not,
The Mariners already have a committee, but when we do the philanthropy, there's a committee.
yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe there should be somebody else in addition, or to.
We can, this is just a
You
proposal.
set up a criteria, you set up, like, each thing has a criteria. So you set up the criteria, so whoever's on that committee will know the guidelines. And before you let the person know that you're gonna give them an award or whatever, then you make sure that the criteria fits. It's not like sometimes we give them away because we like the person. We have a criteria that you have to follow, and that wasn't followed in the past. That's why you don't see a lot of them given away. Because you know what, there's a reason for them.
Yeah, anyway, I just wanted to make sure that's covered.
So this isn't actually naming the field.
No.
The field's already the Nate Ross Field, I thought.
No.
That's the football
The-
field,
No,
it's all
not.
confusing.
It's the baseball field.
And this is why we don't name things like
That's
that.
why, I agree. I don't think we should be naming
Because we
things.
don't really know.
So this is not named,
Right.
but
The
This is a good,
information we has is
could be
that the football field was named for Nate Ross, and not the baseball field, but it's pretty much known as Nate Ross Field.
yeah, okay. So I think this is a good compromise without naming a field or naming anything like the
So
clock
what's the
idea.
balance?
and
Well,
we
they
don't
just
have
gave
to
so many.
Yeah, no, but I thought he got to name I thought he got to name it.
10 years. No, it's New Balance track and field at Noel Stadium. They added their name.
Because Jerry O'Neill was coming forward with $500,000 to get the naming rights to Nate Ross Field. The ad hoc committee may think differently.
Yes. You got that right.
That's
Well,
funny.
Is the New Balance for, you said 10 years, did I hear someone say 10 years? or-
Yeah, oh yeah, it was a time, and it's gonna expire soon.
Oh, so it's only for 10 years and then it's back to
10
the
years.
Gloucester High School?
Little stadium.
It's always Newell Stadium,
It's always been Newell Stadium.
which is the
Well,
New Balance
Fighting
field at.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll kick in out of that.
Yeah, maybe he'll, say, it has boosted
Might
my
be always
sales.
Well, if he wants to build a new school, I'll name the school after him. I don't care.
All right, well,
He
like
can do
I
whatever
said,
he wants. He wants money, he wants
Oh, he's
to.
part of our property tax problem.
Oh, I
Chapter 70.
That is
true.
okay, so anyways, both of these things are just
These
being
are good.
referred to be an F. There's no vote.
Right.
They're gonna keep working
And we
on
just want to
those.
make sure we're going in the right direction.
Mhm.
know. I think you are. I think it sounds good.
Just stay away from the.
Okay, and we'll move on to the remaining action items. We have a number of grants, we have 3 grants. The first one is the 21st Century Community Learning Grant in the amount of $140,250.
I
Right.
move that we accept
Okay.
the 21st Century Grant.
Second.
Okay, this is the, I believe the grant that is used for the after-school program at O'Malley School, which is called the O'Malley
Academy.
Academy,
Is
right?
there matching?
No,
Well, yes.
This is a small amount, I think it's, was it $25,000?
There's a $25,000 match. Right now, we received the bulk of that from the Gloucester Ed Foundation. There's a $5,000 amount that is raised by the students through fundraising efforts.
Excellent.
We have used the community block grant in the past for about $5,000, but we'll be looking this year for another $5,000 to fill that grant.
That's excellent. Thank you.
any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. The next one is the Northeast Coalition, Youth Coalition Grant in the amount of $500 to Gloucester High School.
I move that we accept the Northeast Coalition grant.
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion?
Only to mention, if I may, that this has to do with providing support for suicide prevention and mental health awareness in our schools.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. The third is a number of Gloucester Education Foundation grants in the total amount of $27,245, and they break down as $10,050 for after-school music, $6,550 for your favorite Jill ballroom dancing.
That's different. After school only, that's different.
And it was $3,500. I don't get, oh, why has it got two numbers here? Oh,
The ballroom dancing is 3,500. The after-school music is the 6,550
It adds up.
to 10,500.
oh, okay, I see, there's the breakdown of the,
Oh, yeah.
that's the breakdown of the 10,050. Okay, and then there's $17,195 for Electric Go at O'Malley. Electro Go, I believe this is supporting the
Electrical engineering.
the
Aquaponics.
aquaponics program. Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we approve Gloucester Ed Foundation grants totaling $27,245.
Second?
Somebody second.
Is there any discussion? Joel?
Just to clear that, although I may have in the past, may in the future question the wisdom of the Mad Hot Ball, I have no issue with after-school ballroom dance program in O'Malley, and I welcome the funds, so thank you.
All right. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous. And now one of the oddest things that we do is, for some reason, in ed reform, the school committee selects and appoints the superintendent. They basically, the superintendent selects, but the school committee approves the CFO and the assistant superintendent. But we also approve the nurses
Nurses and physicians.
and physicians. So we have a new nurse appointment. It's here at the preschool, and did we?
I didn't see anything on it.
We didn't
I
get
looked for it, but I didn't see anything.
What, you didn't submit anything?
But we're
Not
coming
very
up with information as we speak. Her name is Teresa Engelman.
That would help, because if
Yeah.
we're going to appoint her, it's good to know her name.
Yes.
And what's her resume?
I mean,
Paper.
Paper.
and how
But
are we
school
supposed to appoint her
nurses-
without knowing
But
anything about
generally,
her?
school nurses are interviewed and selected by the principal and the head of nursing, right?
Mhm.
So.
So how could we do
Do we know
We just have
We
to
have to by
approve it.
law.
It's the law, we have to do it.
it? Okay.
It's state law, we have to do
So
it.
she's in place and appears to be doing a very
Oh, she's
Awesome
already
job.
here. Okay,
What
so
school is she at?
Preschool.
Oh, preschool, sorry.
preschool.
Okay, so her name is Teresa
Engelman.
Engelman.
Well, since she's already here, do we want to table it and see if we want to unapprove her, but we see her? No?
No.
Okay.
You validate that she's a certified nurse, yes.
Yes, everything's where it needs to be as far as that's concerned, yes.
Okay, I move that we approve the appointment of the nurse at preschool.
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now,
Oh, wait.
in the submittal, the last submittal they made to MSBA, the MSBA had a question which about whether the school committee had voted in favor of pursuing consolidated East Gloucester and Veterans Memorial School. We sent them, I put it in the packet for the last meeting, we sent them the minutes of the meeting of August 24th, 2016, where we did vote that. But it was, what we did was vote a document which contained that in it. And what we've got back from them is they want just to have a nice clean vote. So we have redrafted a vote, and we're going to, everybody, well, the mayor wasn't here for that meeting on August 24th, he probably meant the 24th, 2016, but anyway, it was unanimous at the time. So we just, you wrote down.
Mr. Ellis has sent us some suggested language for it if you.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, I can find that. I
It's
thought what we,
virtually the same.
yeah, okay.
So this is Mr. Ellis's proposed motion that the Gloucester School Committee reaffirm the decision of the school committee in 2016 to consolidate the number of elementary schools from 5 to 3.
I make a motion to affirm the decision
She
made.
just said,
The Gloucester School Committee decision from August 3rd,
24th.
24th, 2016,
Yeah.
to consolidate the 5 elementary schools to 3 elementary schools.
Second.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Present.
Okay.
Well,
We
if you
need
ask
to-
me for
we-
money, I'm not gonna say yes, I'm going away. Gotta be careful.
Okay, so what we
Money
need
always involved with
to,
that.
we need to record that,
So we need to have a,
it was 5 in favor and 1 present. We just need to
Right.
write that down. They're gonna
Yeah.
want that.
Mhm.
when are they going to need it before the minutes come out? Do we need to vote to reconsider?
Wouldn't hurt.
right away.
I think I think it was one of the things, they gave us a list of things that they
So
wanted.
does everybody know when you vote to
You
reconsider?
don't know.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
about now.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion to reconsider the vote on the reaffirmation of our commitment to the consolidation of our elementary schools from 5 to 3.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
It passes.
Fails.
It fails, that's right, it fails 6 to 0. 0 to 6.
6.
Yes.
So it's available immediately.
Okay. So that covers all of our action items. We move on to our discussion items. I guess we've covered MSBA and the project update. I will just mention that we did finally sign the final papers to close out the roof project at the high school. And I don't remember, but that even with the addition of the rooftop units, it still came in under budget.
Nice.
Even the 2 rounds of rooftop units, that was not under warranty, that redo of the.
Whatever coating was supposed to
Yeah.
Yeah,
weatherproof it wasn't.
yeah,
Was replaced.
yeah. So that is done. Preschool location, nothing has changed in that. The city's in negotiations. Email dated 9/17/19 from Chief Eric Smith. And that is about fire inspections. Just for your information. Or I could read it if you'd like.
No, it's okay.
I won't read
It was very favorable.
Yeah.
It's
It was
favorable. And there's also one here from the building inspector.
Very favorable.
Just one sentence that sort of sums them up as far as our preparations for the year. It's apparent that everyone, with respect to building inspections, it's apparent that everyone has gotten on the same page, working together to not only improve the building conditions, but also to provide a safe building for the students to learn.
Is there anything else? Joel?
So, the great segue from that, I sent an email in a short while ago, a couple weeks, looking for a report on whether our school buildings had carbon monoxide alarms, and if so, which ones. I assume West Parish does, that's me assuming, but I'd like to know, especially as we keep hearing over and over about antiquated heating systems that aren't running at peak efficiency, I'd like to know if those schools happen to have carbon monoxide alarms. If not,
I know they have them in O'Malley.
Yeah, and you asked me that through email, and Eric, I sent it back to you all, but he said, yes, the schools have them. Let me look, Eric Smith, the chief of the fire department.
I know, I remember because we used to get bad readings at O'Malley until, before they did the work.
Yeah.
You know, kids would doze off.
we're not required by the state to have them unless you renovate. So they said like, that's a percentage, it was less than half the schools in the state actually have them because most of the schools in the state are old.
But Eric Smith apparently would be the person you can find that email.
It's my understanding we have some CO coverage due to the boilers, et cetera, in every schools.
Okay. I know they have them throughout O'Malley, because I remember, you know.
The law, and it puts on, DPW will answer and answer. The laws don't require the CO detection, as you would expect for the older facilities. They're not residential and people are not sleeping overnight there, but we do.
Right.
So let's refer that to DNF and get a real report,
Yeah.
you know, because it was vague.
Yeah.
Did you get that, Mr. Chair of DNF?
Yeah.
Okay, all
Good pay, guys,
right. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Thank you, David, thank